All right, so we're going to pick up now talking about the trait theory of personality. So one of the first people to really kind of look into this trait theory was a guy named Gordon Allport, and he decided that Freud overvalued unconscious motives and undervalued our real observable personality styles and traits. Myers and Briggs, future trait theorists, wanted to study individual behaviors and statements to find out how people differed in personality, thus having different traits. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the MBTI, is a questionnaire categorizing people by traits. And these are some of the things that we're going to be, tests that we're going to be taking in class. So what is a trait? Well, a trait is an enduring quality that makes a person tend to act in a certain way. For instance, honest, shy, hardworking. Okay, and in order for it to be a trait, it does need to be enduring. Okay, meaning that it can't just be something like, short-lived or something that's situationally based. It needs to kind of be present throughout the majority of that person. So the MBTI traits come in pairs. So for instance, judging versus perceiving, or thinking versus feeling. So the trait theory of personality then says that we are made up of a collection of traits, behavioral predispositions that can be identified and measured, traits that differ from person to person, or characteristic patterns of behaviors. Now, anybody can have any traits, but it's the combination of those traits that kind of turn your personality into you. So, in the history of trait theory, the Eysenck's personality dimension was one of the originals. And they used something called factor analysis, which is identifying factors that tend to cluster together to come up with their personality kind of dimensions. It works on two scales: unstable to stable, and then introverted versus extroverted. And like what they would say is that depending on where you fell in the scale, you would, exhibited different personality traits. So for instance, if you fell in the unstable extroverted quality, you're going to have these personality traits. Where if you fell in the stable introverted category, you would kind of have this dimension of traits. Now, research supports their idea that these variations are linked to genetics. So that's another thing. A lot of their kind of research looks into the genetic qualities of these kind of four different dimensions. And so again, key thing though to really remember here is factor analysis. That term factor analysis, make sure you know and understand that factor analysis is a kind of a statistical technique that's used to identify factors that tend to cluster together. So for instance, these clustered together. So they were able to identify these as extroverted unstable traits because through their research they found, through factor analysis, they found that these clustered. Okay, so really make sure you're familiar with that term factor analysis. Now, one of the big questions is always, is traits rooted in biology? Well, the brain, looking at the brain, extroverts tend to have low levels of brain activity, making it hard to suppress impulses and leading them to seek stimulation. In terms of the body, the trait of shyness appears to be rooted in high autonomic nervous system reactivity and easily triggered alarm system. Genes, we know that selective breeding in animals seem to create lifelong differences in traits such as aggression, sociability, calmness, suggesting genetic roots for these traits. So there is a lot of kind of scientific evidence that supports the fact that a lot of our traits are biological, they're genetic. Now, how do we assess traits? Well, we use questionnaires, okay? We call these personality inventories, and this is what we're going to be doing tomorrow in class. Questionnaires assess many personality traits by asking which behaviors and responses the person would choose. Now, most of these are empirically derived tests, okay? Here's another term that you need to make sure that you know and understand, okay, is in this empirically derived. Okay, basically empirically derived means that all test items have been selected to because they predictably match the qualities being assessed. So for instance, if you are giving somebody a shyness test, you are picking questions that have already been predicted to detect shyness. Okay, so this is something that we use on personality inventories to try to make sure that the test is testing what it's supposed to be. Okay, so one of the classic personality inventories is something called the MMPI, or the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and it was designed to identify people with personality difficulties and focusing on abnormal personality tendencies. Okay, it was a true false questionnaire, items were selected because they correlate with various traits, emotions, and attitudes. For example, depressed people tend to answer true to the question, nothing in the paper interests me except for the comics. So what we found is that through a series of questioning of people who were known to have depression and people who were not known to have depression, the people that were depressed tended to answer true on that question. So because we can then take all of those questions and we could put them onto this MMPI, or we can put them onto a personality inventory, we know then that when people are taking this test, that if they answer true, or they answer according to, the people that were known to be depressed, that could be an indicator that that person is depressed as well. So the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, is another term you should make sure you're aware of. So the big five, the Eyse, remember they were the stable, unstable, introverted, extroverted, felt that people varied along two dimensions. But cross-cultural research and theory supports the expansion from two dimensions into five, okay? And these are conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. Okay, so to help you remember this, you can think our mnemonic device here is C.A.N.O.E. Right? Some people remember ocean better. If you kind of flip them around, you could remember ocean as well. Okay, but these kind of are the expanded versions of these personality factors. These are the big five that we all have, and then where we fall among, kind of on the spectrum of conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, extroversion, kind of influences our personality and who we are. Okay, so again, if we look at this big five, these C.A.N.O.E personality dimensions, you can see that you can be highly conscientious, which is organized, careful, and disciplined, or low, disorganized, careless, and impulsive. And then where you fall on each of these different measures kind of then puts together the traits that are the core of your personality. Okay, so again, tomorrow in class we are going to be taking a lot of these different tests. So you guys can be doing some of these, taking some of these big five, taking some of the Myers-Briggs, and then some other various personality